a baby is born with a strangely mature consciousness, happily watched by his new mother. He opens his status panel and notices that he has returned to level 1 and also that he simply has no name at all. Beside the woman, a man addressed as Your Majesty approaches and compliments the child's eyes, which look like the mother's. She, in return, thinks the baby's mouth is identical to the father's. In front of a crowd of kneeling subjects, the king chooses the name of his son, Noah Ararat, who receives the title of 13th Imperial Prince. After seeing his status updated with his new title, Noah is shocked by the importance he seems to hold in this new life. The king asks a subordinate what the boy's aptitude is, and he answers that it is water. In that case, considering that Almeria is home to many members of the Water Clan, His Majesty declares that this will be his son's fief. At the same moment, Noah notices that among the available elements in his status, a +S appears in the water attribute. The king asks Cruz to show what his son is capable of doing. Then Cruz begins an enchantment that develops Noah's water abilities to a new value, SS. Immediately, the people present are astonished to realize that Noah's power has already awakened on his very first day of life, an extremely rare occurrence that delights the subjects. After all, nothing is more incredible than being the king's son and being born with such an impressive talent. Noah Ararat was born in a kingdom whose capital is located on a plain surrounded by imposing mountains, known as the Country of Warriors, the Mills Empire. This country is living its golden age and has been attracting a remarkable flow of money and development. Noah, as the 13th biological son of the man who ruled these prosperous lands, was loved by the subjects for his talent and personality. 6 years after his reincarnation, the prince noticed that everyone sees his status as if his water attribute were SS, while only he sees it as SS, an addition made by his subordinates. For example, the S in water comes from the fief of Almeria, to which he belongs by his father's decision on the day of his birth. The rest comes from his maids. By the way, as he grew and gained more subordinates, the young noble discovered that his level can increase infinitely. Not only having this unexpected privilege, Noah was also seen by the maids as someone who, despite his young age when most kids of his generation prefer spending the day causing mischief, was personally calm, focused, and strangely mature, emanating an air of leadership that not even many adult nobles could convey. Even so, of course, there are still limits to what a 6-year-old child can do. One day, Noah was approached by Evelyn, a beautiful maid specialized in receiving visitors. She informs him that the 2nd and 4th princes have come to visit and that he should eat calmly so he can receive his brothers. Since the crown prince is among them, Noah feels slight pressure at having to meet such an important figure of the kingdom. But, as someone born to take on that kind of responsibility, he does not disappoint. After lunch, he bows to Albert Ararat, the 2nd prince and crown prince, as well as Henry Ararat, the 4th prince. Both praise their younger brother's impeccable manners and emphasize that he will possibly become an excellent prime minister in the future. When announcing that he brought a gift for Noah, Albert claps his hands so that a servant enters the room carrying a heavy box that emanates a brutally dark and striking energy. The man struggles so much under its weight that he almost drops it harder than he should. When ordered, the servant opens the box and is overwhelmed by a horrible vision of desperate screams, where men fear being devoured and beg Albert for help. In the middle of this vision, a sword appears, the same sword that is now inside the room. Noah is visibly hesitant about this peculiar weapon, but Albert pushes him to hold it. Since it is a gift from the crown prince, the young boy cannot simply refuse, so he gathers courage and holds the sword. Albert tells him that its name is Leviathan, the most powerful water magic sword in the empire. Around 120 people died trying to tame this relic. Noah becomes slightly desperate upon hearing something so terrible, but his brother reassures him by explaining that if the boy were going to die, he would have died the moment he touched the weapon. Speaking of which, unlike the servant who struggled to carry the box, Noah has an SS rank water attribute, which gives him the power necessary to withstand Leviathan's surreal weight. Noah feels tested on a nearly sadistic level, since his brother knew he could have died when touching the sword. This fills him with anger, but knowing he could harm himself if he said anything, he decides to stay quiet. When leaving the room, Henry asks if it was right to leave such a valuable item with the boy, but Albert sees no problem, because it is better for it to be with someone who has talent worthy of the weapon. Speaking of which, being so capable, Noah should also experience what it feels like to have his hand bitten by his own dog. That night, Noah asked Zoe, one of his maids, why she seemed so down. Despite her reluctance to speak, her master insisted enough to make her open up. the 18-year-old maid finally confesses that she is thinking of taking time off because a flood recently hit her hometown and destroyed her family's crops, and even her single mother lost her job. Zoe's relatives told her to work in the brothel and serve the imperial prince to help her family. Hearing this, Noah interrupts her and offers a job to the girl's mother in the mansion, with a salary of 10 lians a month. In this case, her only task would be to keep the back door locked. Zoe admits she has never seen such an easy job, especially with a salary above that of most people. Then Noah, without dwelling on the topic, also gives the maid and her mother an empty house in the western area of the city. Crying, Zoe kneels down and thanks him. While the young noble thinks that his title as the 13th prince would be stained if this girl, who has taken care of him since he was little, continued working in a brothel, announcing that she will be his maid for the rest of her life. The noble summons Dylan, his butler, and tells him about the flood in Dasso, Zoe's hometown. Having said that, he orders his subordinate to buy as much land as he can in that city, leaving both employees not understanding anything. Noah then explains that, just like Zoe's family home, some ill-intentioned people will try to extort goods from families who are struggling. So Dylan must save these residents before it's too late. Admitting his surprise, the butler says he had never seen a noble of this age make such a brilliant decision. In reality, Noah obviously cannot say this, but before reincarnating in his former life, he was tired of seeing situations like this. Dylan then asks where the funds will come from, since this would be a high investment of approximately 700,000 lians, and Zoe almost faints upon hearing such a high amount. Noah understands why she is shocked, since the annual income of an adult man in the imperial capital is only 120 lians, and even the prince's own salary is 8,000 lians per year. Besides that, it is important to mention the tax revenue from Almeria which, added to the congratulatory money from the emperor, makes the house of the 13th imperial prince have only around 500,000 lians available. So, in this case, they are missing 200,000 to make the necessary investment in Dasso. With that in mind, the noble decrees the sale of the land south of the imperial capital. Frightened, Dylan reminds him that those lands were a gift from his imperial majesty, and that selling them without permission would be considered an affront. Even so, Noah decides to tank the punishment he'll receive from his father and pushes the project forward. Because, according to him, nobles have obligations that sometimes demand sacrifices, and the priority must always be the happiness of the people. According to the young man, this kind of self-control is also a privilege of the nobility. With the decision made, Dylan ends up thanking his lord, and Noah realizes why. The butler is also from Dasso, the region that suffered from the flood. The next day, one of Noah's maids was in the courtyard organizing which box would go in which wagon. Observing the employee's work, Noah is called by Henry, who wants to know where his brother is going. The boy explains his plan to buy land in Dasso to help the population that fell victim to the flood. Then, seeing the water magic sword in one of the carriages in the convoy, the fourth prince asks if the boy is going to use it. Noah replies that he won't, because even though he can feel some kind of power, he still hasn't received any response beyond that still. He decided to take the weapon with him. By the way, Noah asks why his brother came alone, and he says that Albert said something strange, so he asked them to investigate. Apparently, Leviathan has a will of its own and only obeys someone it recognizes as its master. Instantly, Noah thinks that if he isn't accepted by the relic, he will suffer the same horrible fate as the people he saw in his vision. Speaking of which, Henry says he understands why his brother wants to take the sword, but asks him not to use it, since he might die if he does. With Leviathan in the luggage, Noah Ararat heads toward Dasso, and, after the trip, comes face to face with the devastation caused by the flood that swept away much of the city. As Zoe brings her hand to her mouth in fear, the 13th prince asks Dylan to go to the government office, since many houses were carried away by the catastrophe along with their property titles. Therefore, the option is to buy according to the government office's list. Dylan and Zoe are impressed by another brilliant insight from their master, while Noah takes responsibility for anything that may go wrong. After the butler leaves, the noble asks Zoe to show him the region, and as they walk through Dasso's destroyed alleyways, the boy notices that the tubers are also starting to rot, which is yet another sign of the complete destruction suffered by the territory. Even when Zoe recommends that her master not dedicate himself so much to this matter, he insists he will return to Dasso alone if the maid does not want to accompany him. And speaking of missions, they see that the Empire seems to be doing its part in the region. because in the middle of the city, a community soup line has been set up to feed the hungry population that is homeless and unemployed. However, tasting the food himself, Noah sees that the soup is basically pure water, so poor that it is almost rotten, with a terrible taste that makes that clear. Even so, an old man interrupts the noble to say that no one should complain, considering that at least they still have something to eat. Noah tries to explain that the issue is that the empire would not serve food like this. But the conversation is interrupted by the arrival of a group of men announcing an inspection. According to Zoe, the one responsible is Galal, a local employee who pinches his nose in disgust as he gets close to the soup. Smiling despite the terrible quality of the rations, one of the inspectors assures that, despite everything, Galal's share will be delivered to his mansion. Hearing that, Noah approaches and bluntly asks if he is witnessing embezzlement, which makes Galal laugh at the boldness of this kid. He argues that the region is going through serious difficulties and adds that people who are able to provide help need to be decisively rewarded, which is basically him justifying getting rich in the middle of a tragedy while the people eat water soup. Without backing down, Noah points out the man's crime of enriching himself at the expense of others' suffering. And, enraged, Galal makes it clear that this is also an affront to Lord Rowan, ruler of these lands. With the image of Leviathan in his mind, Noah immediately sentences the inspector to death, and the magic sword flies toward the noble, placing itself at his side as if agreeing with the criminal's punishment. As he unleashes a torrent of water around the boy, Noah feels the relic's power taking hold of him. Just as he takes hold of that extraordinary energy, it's a painful act that causes the human genuine suffering. Yet he had both the talent and the determination to wield that equipment. With the sword in his hand, he orders Leviathan to use its power for the people, as should be done by all those who possess the privilege of strength, the true meaning of nobility. In response, Galal attacks with his sword, but Noah quickly beheads him. The inspector's death triggers a violent reaction from his guards, but before they can strike, Leviathan reacts on its own and creates a crater so massive in the ground that one couldn't even see the bottom. Hearing the commotion, the captain of the knights who govern Dasso arrives at the site of the impact and is stunned when he sees the enormous hole. One of the inspector's subordinates accuses the child of killing Galal, and when he realizes who that child is, Lord Rowan Green runs toward Noah and kneels to show respect to the 13th prince of the Mills Empire. He explains that he belongs to Henry's family, Noah's brother, and that he had been given the task of maintaining public order in the region. Immediately, Rowan announces to everyone present that they stand before the prince, and the subjects kneel in respect. Noah, in turn, reports the embezzlement carried out by the official in charge of inspections in Dasso, justifies Galal's punishment, and even points out the criminal's accomplices, demanding that Rowan punish them as he deems necessary. Lastly, the noble orders the community soup to be remade with royal-level quality, a decision that fills the hungry townspeople with joy. Hours later, when he hears about his younger brother's actions, Albert concludes that Noah was not bitten by a rabid dog. Instead, he made the dog obey him, which means the boy is more useful than he had imagined. The next day, Noah responds to a summons from his father. When he enters the throne room, he anxiously awaits the king's punishment for having sold the lands granted to him in the south of the empire. However, to his surprise, His Majesty thanks his son for preventing the success of those who tried to take advantage of the tragedy in Dasso. The emperor understands that Noah arrived in Dasso by chance through a maid who lived there, but he also believes the boy's deeds were the will of God, especially the fact that he managed to master Leviathan, the water magic sword. Speaking of which, the ruler once again asks Cruz to test his son's power. And when that is done, Noah's status panel appears, showing his water attribute reaching SSS rank. The emperor is delighted, convinced that the boy can still help the empire greatly. In the next moment, we see several parts of the capital of the Mills Empire, the political, cultural, and economic center of the country, a place known as the most glorious and prosperous in the world today. On Reed Street, according to the eunuchs, Noah would find a musical performance taking place. Wanting to repay what the master had done for her homeland, Zoe volunteers to join him on this mission. When they enter a theater, they arrive just in time for the performance of a young girl with pink hair and a melancholic expression, singing a song about how love, at times, can turn into pain. Noah remembers that, according to what he'd been told, the artist's name is Alachi. He notices that her technique is still that of a beginner, but he enjoys what he sees, since it's clear she sings from the heart. However, suddenly, a group of men bursts into the theater, breaking everything. Their leader, a big bald man, orders Alachi to stop singing, claiming that with this income she'll never be able to pay the debt her father left behind. The singer argues that this is the only way she can manage to pay what she owes, but the man suggests that every woman has a very specific way of earning money, and we know exactly what he means. In the midst of this, Noah calmly stands up and cites an article of imperial law, stating that children should not be forced to carry their parents' debts. He also points out that pushing this debt onto the daughter and trying to force her to sell her body is a crime. The man becomes furious and threatens Noah, who responds by using Leviathan's power to subdue the brute and his companions. Realizing he would be destroyed if he fought this guy, the bald man runs off, but promises he'll be back. While the entire audience is left speechless upon realizing they are in the presence of an imperial prince, Noah says he enjoyed the girl's singing and asks what her monthly expenses are. Embarrassed, she explains that she needs to pay for her mother's medical treatment. So Noah decides to give her a monthly payment of 25 leons so she can sing peacefully whenever she wants or needs, promising to increase the amount whenever she improves. Later, the noble returns to his humble residence, where he is greeted by his humble servants cleaning his humble shoes. He asks who those men causing trouble at the theater were, and Evelyn explains that they are known for lending money illegally in the region, in other words, classic loan sharks. By the way, upon discovering who they had been dealing with, the troublemakers found the decency to bow at the prince's gate to apologize for what they had done. But Noah orders the maids to send them away. After all, criminals, especially criminals, cannot speak to an imperial prince whenever they please. Henry appears at the house entrance, praising his brother's stance, since accepting people like that so easily lowers the status of the imperial house and its princes. Noah understands that this is one reason, but there is another behind it. Still, he wants to reveal this reason to his brother inside the house, in a private conversation. So the two gather, and Noah tells him about the singer he is helping, and that he needs to act firmly with the loan sharks, so they understand Alachi is not alone. Henry asks if the vocal slap she gave him was a good one, and the short prince admits he's still dizzy. Henry didn't think a kid his age would get this far, especially considering Frank and Gary, who are around Noah's age and aren't even close. Gary, for example, is still an immature brat who never learns proper etiquette. Hearing this, Noah reflects that although they are all brothers, each one has a different mother. However, Henry and Gary, who share the same mother, must have a different type of connection. Changing the subject, Henry comments that Noah seems to have mastered the magic sword well, and the boy says that this is thanks to his brother, who taught him that Leviathan has a will of its own. Even so, the older brother wants to know how the kid carries that huge thing around, since it's far too big for him. Noah then summons the sword in front of his brother and explains that he hides it in his sleeve in miniature form, a trick the sword itself taught him. Impressed, Henry remarks that this is unprecedented, since Leviathan was kept isolated for 200 years as a national treasure, and there are no records mentioning anything like this in the past. It is an incredible achievement for Noah. When night falls and the two princes finally appear at the gate, the loan sharks are still there, bowing. Eventually, after waiting so long, the big guy loses his patience and demands not to be ignored by the arrogant brat. His companions try to stop him from speaking like that, but it was too late. The damage was done. With just a slight movement, Noah somehow affects the man, making him choke and quickly become obedient. Henry asks what on earth his brother did, and Noah explains that he simply released a bit of Leviathan's power as a form of domination. In the end, Henry compliments the control the boy demonstrates over the magic sword. A few hours later, answering an invitation, Noah rides by carriage to a location where he is greeted by a man named Radok, who leads the prince into a huge hall full of impeccably dressed people applauding the appearance of one of the king's most beloved and respected sons. Radok is curious about the weapon the boy carries, and Noah explains that it is Leviathan, a magic sword given to him by the crown prince. This information leaves everyone stunned, since it is a national treasure personally granted by Albert Ararat. Knowing that the 13th prince's domain is Almiri, the crowd connects this territory with the sword Noah carries. In the middle of all the chatter, however, there is a brief moment of silence in which, just like in an episode of El Chavo, only one guy happens to be talking, and he's ironically mocking the prince's sword, saying it looks like one of those toy swords that light up when you press a button and are sold in department stores. Noah looks straight at the man, who pretends it wasn't him, but Leviathan knew well who it was. Without delay, the sword releases a dark miasma that starts suffocating and driving the people in the hall insane. Noah demands that the weapon stop doing that and points out that loyalty is good, but this was an exaggeration after all. It was clear the sword got angry after hearing its master being disrespected. Despite the tense moment, Radok applauds the Imperial Prince and highlights the vast power of national treasures, since it became obvious that everyone there had the privilege of feeling the same sensation of death through His Highness's overwhelming power. Immediately, the guests begin applauding Noah Ararat as if he hadn't nearly killed everyone, while Radok asks the prince what should be done with the laid-back guy who spoke badly about Leviathan. Noah replies that they should just ignore him because what comes from below doesn't reach you. Then, some guests are brought forward to meet His Highness, one of them being a famous merchant known as Lance Allison. However, the ones who catch the prince's attention the most are the two people who appear next. A man who introduces himself as Byron Allen, administrator of the Allen Mercantile Company. Beside him, not very comfortable with these situations, a girl introduces herself as Cindy Allen. Right away, Noah asks if she is adopted, because Byron seems to be someone from the second or third generation and carries the mannerisms of the upper class, unlike the girl. Besides that, he also noticed that Cindy had been a slave in the past, since from the moment she arrived her gaze has been one of intense observation, the eyes of someone who had once been enslaved. Impressed, Allen confirms the prince's suspicions and admits that he bought Cindy, but that she is smart and learns things quickly. However, contrary to what the merchant expected, the prince admires and encourages this kind of thing, even inviting the man to visit his mansion someday to talk more about the child. Upon hearing this, the people around them react as if Byron had won the lottery, and all the attention and envy in the hall shift toward the merchant and his daughter as he withdraws from His Highness's presence. When he leaves, Noah comments to Radok that there is another reason he knew she wasn't his real daughter. Whenever the prince reaches for his sword, the girl immediately turns toward it with full focus, which proves Cindy has been protecting Allen since the first threat. Later, after the event, Noah Ararat goes to the marketplace and happens to run into one of his brothers, Oscar. Seeing that Noah is free, Oscar invites him to look for some treasures, since they are on Cobalt Street, a place where various antiques from all over the Empire gather, some of which can have great value. Of course, many forgeries are placed among the original pieces, so one needs to be careful in order to conduct a true treasure hunt without walking out of there with a cheap knockoff. Some time later, after a long search, Oscar ends up giving up on finding anything worthwhile. Noah, on the other hand, finds a book he finds interesting and, for the symbolic price of 3 lions, manages to get the item for himself. Oscar asks whether that is the treasure they were looking for, but Noah was just curious about it. That said, his brother takes a more serious look at the book and realizes that this is definitely a spell grimoire by the legendary mage Andrea, which is probably worth around 1,000 lions. Oscar asks how Noah knew that, but the truth is he had no idea. He only knew that his wind magic increased when he touched the item. On that note, noticing his sword trembling in the sheath, Noah draws Leviathan and points the blade at the grimoire, since the only ones capable of increasing his abilities are those that possess a will of their own, which seems to be the case with this book. As expected, the book opens and releases what Oscar believes to be the vengeful spirit of the mage who mastered wind magic. As if it were a shadowy entity, that ghostly manifestation seems dangerous enough to make anyone run away in fear, anyone except Noah Ararat, who, wielding his magic sword, uses its water power to expel the spirit with relative ease. Worried and still unable to fully believe what he saw, Oscar asks about the potential damage to the city from the magic his brother used, but Noah explains that he fired upward, avoiding any such problem, which impresses Oscar even more due to how quick and correct that decision was. In the midst of this, the owner of an antique shop named Alan Bardsley bows before the princes, and, after seeing what Noah is capable of with magical items, tells him he has a special treasure he needs to show the young noble. Thus, Noah and Oscar go to the merchant's shop, where he displays a ring that, according to him, will only reveal its true power when the rightful owner appears. He has already shown this relic to many different people, but nothing special has ever happened. Faced with this, Noah wonders if the thing might be fake or simply useless. But of course Bardsley has considered that, and even tried throwing it away, yet it always returned to the shop as if nothing had happened, which made him believe there really is something unusual about it. Since he sees his brother as someone who has a certain affinity with untamable magical items, Oscar asks Noah to put the ring on, which he does. When he does, the ring emits a glow, and, with a voice only the bearer can hear, announces that its rarity level is SSS and recognizes Noah as its true owner. With that, a gray mass begins spreading around the boy's body, forming an armor that doesn't increase any of his stats, but seems to be a different kind of entity from the others, with many possible uses. Satisfied with this, Noah says he will send payment for the item to Alan. But Oscar insists on paying and giving the ring as a gift, since he has increasingly seen that there is something different inside his brother that needs to be encouraged. After that meeting at Alan's shop, Oscar gives his brother a ride back home, and the moment the boy steps out of the carriage, he's attacked by the big, bald loan shark who had only been waiting for the right moment to settle the score. Noah reacts immediately, using the power of his ring to conjure a shield made from the strange material the item produces, blocking the sword strike thrown by the attacker. Right after that, one of Noah's servants takes advantage of the moment to knock the loan shark down and subdue him. Oscar asks how his brother managed to do that, and Noah explains that he connected the ring to Leviathan, which seems to have acted as an automatic defense in response to the hostility. Hearing this, as always, Oscar is once again impressed by how the boy managed to master that item in such a short amount of time. Sometime later, Noah Ararat returns to the theater where he first found Alachi. Since he dealt with the loan shark, he believes the singer will finally have the peace she deserves, convinced that the man won't bother her again. However, that's far from the truth. Two drunkards who were drinking themselves senseless in the place had the nerve to climb onto the stage and start fighting over the girl, acting as if she were a waitress obligated to serve them more drinks while clearly being interested in something more than that. Just as the two are about to throw a punch, Noah places his magical shield between them and ends up breaking at least one bone in each of their hands when they strike the barrier. Then, with his sword, he slices their clothes apart and forces them to flee the theater in their underwear. Seeing that the clientele of this establishment isn't exactly well-mannered, Noah demands that the owner stop unbearable drunks like those from coming in, but the man laments that, unfortunately, that kind of drunk is literally the entire audience that keeps the place running. Since that's the case, the prince decides to buy the whole dump for 1,000 lians, an amount so high it leaves the guy emotional. Alachi, in turn, thanks him for everything the noble has been doing for her and asks if she can somehow repay all this kindness. Noah then reminds her that the only thing he expects is for her to sing working hard so that one day even the emperor himself might want to hear her voice. And so, the promising young girl begins a song that moves the audience. As time went by, on a certain day, Noah Ararat received a visit from Dead Murray, the general governor of Hajoy, which was Noah's fief. The imperial family had a tradition of granting fiefs to princes so they could learn how to administer them, and the title of lord made the residents view these aristocrats as true masters. This was no different for Dead Murray, originally from Almeria, but now working in Hajoy. By imperial order, he had been assigned to control the floods in that region. But the mission had not been going well. Hajoy was a fertile area that produced grain along the bend of a great river. Although this offered the opportunity for abundant harvests, it came with an obvious drawback. The river could overflow and flood the place. According to the governor, the difficulty in resolving the issue came from the fact that Hajoy had not yet received the funds needed for the project. Despite being an imperial order, the Ministry of Finance kept presenting excuses instead of transferring the money that would help resolve the crisis. Already imagining what this was about, the talented young noble wasted no time and went straight to the mansion of the finance commissioner, Maybrick, who was calmly eating his steak while receiving one of the emperor's sons. Before anything else, Noah told the commissioner to shut his mouth if he planned to say this was something a child wouldn't understand, which immediately made the man realize he might be underestimating someone despite his young age. Forcing a strained smile, Maybrick explained that the flooding in Hajoy had saddened Emperor Ararat so much that he had exempted the fief from paying taxes for the entire year, and that this lack of tax revenue was the reason there was no money available. Noah instantly asked if the commissioner was joking, leaving both Maybrick and Dead Murray stunned by the harsh, direct way the boy spoke. According to Noah, taxes stopped being collected because there were no taxes to collect an act of kindness from the crown. Yet the commissioner behaved as if that were a valid excuse to withhold funds from a fief in need. Feeling the pressure, Maybrick changed his explanation and argued that the national treasury had no available funds because it was focused on building a new summer resort for Emperor Ararat, so that he could spend his vacation somewhere cooler than the capital. Hearing this, Noah lost his patience and pointed out the commissioner's disrespect toward Hajoy by prioritizing the construction of a vacation home over helping a flooded fief. He then threatened to involve the emperor directly so the matter could be resolved properly. At this, Maybrick panicked and knelt before the prince, begging for mercy. Noah agreed to let it go as long as the commissioner sent the budget to Hajoy immediately. At once, Maybrick rushed off to fulfill the order, and Dead Murray was left impressed that this boy had forced such an important member of the crown to his knees without yielding even a little. The governor apologized for involving the prince in the matter and left to handle the flooding using the funds sent. After this meeting, just as Dead Murray was departing, Noah was informed of a summons from Emperor Ararat. He responded to the call and, upon meeting his father, received praise for resolving the issue in Hajoy. Noah was surprised the emperor already knew what had happened, considering it had just taken place, and the emperor explained that information is a weapon one his son should constantly strive to refine. Noah replied that he had simply done what was natural in such a case. But Emperor Ararat said that doing what is natural is difficult, as many people have smooth speech and flattery, but few who truly make the easy seem easy. In any case, placing a hand on his son's head, he expressed how impressed he was with the boy, who was only 6 years old. When the ruler told him to stand, he noticed that the sword Leviathan had shrunk in size to match its master's height. Noah figured that his own mansion was obviously part of the emperor's information network as well. His father admired the boy's control over a magic sword with such a terrible history. Those words made Noah remember the gala event in which Leviathan had been provoked by that man, releasing the macabre miasma that almost suffocated everyone. Regardless, the emperor believed it was a good idea to assign the prince an appropriate instructor so he could handle the magic sword as safely as possible. Thus, he summoned Damian Noble, the greatest swordsman in the empire, who would be responsible for teaching the young noble the art of swordsmanship. To Noah's surprise, Damian Noble asked to test the boy in a duel. Emperor Ararat reminded him that his son was only a child, but the instructor explained that he simply wished to assess the boy's talent, not his technique. When the ruler allowed the duel, Noah was even more impressed by how confidently Damian had persuaded the emperor so quickly. Damian Noble told Noah to attack however he wished, and the boy charged straight at him. In that moment, he felt Leviathan's memories of its former masters rising within him. A clash ensued between the two swordsmen, and after a few exchanges, Noah shocked everyone by disarming his opponent. By doing this, the boy expected nothing less from a magic sword that had accepted him as its master. Clearly, Leviathan's previous owners had been highly skilled. Even more astonishing, Damian Noble knelt before his imperial majesty and declared that he had nothing to teach the child. Though Noah still had the physical strength of a young boy, he had used technique to disarm the empire's greatest swordsman. This meant the prince already possessed the ability of a master, and Damian believed it would be presumptuous to think he could teach anything to such a child. Hearing this, the emperor let out a laugh and appointed his son as the chief examiner for this year's selection of knights. Unable to believe what he was hearing, Noah bowed before the leader of the empire and promised to do his best to fulfill his new role. The selection of knights in which the boy was placed is a major annual event that involves the entire empire. After all, this is a nation of warriors that values its own class, where the path of martial arts is seen as the only way to achieve success through merit. In this selection, the warriors who won preliminary fights throughout the country will face each other in a deadly battle in the capital, and the winner will receive the title of knight and enter the upper class. The first task of a knight is to become a subordinate of the selection officer, who, in this case, will be Noah Ararat this year. Having a good knight as a member of his team will certainly make the young prince stronger. With that, the emperor asks whether his son will choose his candidates based on brute strength or if he will choose the winner. So Noah establishes that the regional preliminary rounds will be eliminated and the entire selection will take place in the imperial capital. Noah wants everyone to fight in front of him because the empire is huge, making it impossible to follow every regional qualifying round. And it would be a shame if a great talent were lost because of that difficulty. Later, in his mansion, while being served tea by Zoe, he asks the maid whether people from her village are interested in applying for the knight selection. And she explains that they are, because this is the only chance for ordinary people like them to become someone important. That's why every year there is a representative from there. Then Noah tells her that he eliminated the regional championship, meaning anyone who wants to participate can do so without going through that filter. Zoe seems happy about this, but sad at the same time. After the master's insistence, she confesses she feels this way because the real reason why Dassault only sends one representative each year is that it is difficult for them to pay for travel and lodging costs in the capital. which is an expensive place, since the person sent can only go thanks to donations from the other residents, because Dasso's candidate carries the expectations of the entire population into the selection. The whole town always mobilizes for it. Regarding this issue, Noah says he would also like to eliminate this difficulty, because his idea is to do everything possible so that he can check all potential talents and not miss anything. So he decides to cover all expenses related to sending the candidates. Zoe finds it incredible, although she points out that it will be a costly decision. And Noah argues that there is no need to prepare everything from scratch. He then summons Dylan and orders him to buy all vacant houses that exist in the imperial capital. But if that is not enough to accommodate all candidates, the butler must have a dormitory built. In addition, Noah orders Dylan to contact all merchants he knows to announce a meeting with the prince to solve the issue of the candidates' meals. Later, when meeting with Byron Allen and receiving an estimate of how much he will spend on food during the tests, Noah notices that the price is much lower than he expected, and the merchant says he made a special price because it is a request from the 13th prince. However, Noah states categorically that the merchant would never give such a discount out of kindness, which embarrasses Byron Allen for having underestimated the Lord because of his age. In any case, the merchant informs him that while the night selection is happening, there will also be a test to recruit servants for the palace, and Byron Allen would like to know something about the tendencies of the approved candidates. Imagining that Byron Allen wants to send a woman to the palace, Noah responds that if there were someone in the palace under the merchant's control, he could obtain information quickly, and the benefits would be even greater if Emperor Ararat ordered that woman to spend the night with him. Sweating cold at such an extreme statement, the merchant proceeds and says he has already made the payment in advance, so Noah promises to make the recommendation if the candidate is a woman he genuinely likes. With this matter settled, Byron Allen kneels before the prince and, seeing him as the best person to receive this request, the man wishes to include the 13th prince's crest on the sign of his shop, which is a clear demonstration of subordination. Before anything else, Noah makes it clear that he does not forgive betrayal. Upon leaving the meeting at night, the boy reflects in his carriage on how his status has risen by having Byron Allen under his command, which is an important step toward becoming stronger. However, Noah is startled when he notices that his water status has decreased and assumes something must have happened in Almeria. He tells Zoe to inform the coachman that they must go straight to the palace to meet Emperor Ararat immediately. When he meets with his father, surprisingly, the emperor already seems to know that something is happening in Almeria, even before Noah says anything. Not because he knows exactly what is going on, but because he is sensing the signs, while Noah states that there is certainly some problem occurring. At that moment, a servant approaches Emperor Ararat and whispers information into his ear. Impressed with his son's intuition, the ruler reveals that a rebellion is taking place in Almeria and asks his son how serious he believes the problem is. Noah analyzes that if the SS of his water rank became an S, it seems like it was cut in half, but in reality it is only one level below all levels. In other words, at the moment the prince believes the rebellion is small in scale. The emperor says the answer is correct, since according to the report, this revolt involves around 5,000 people, the equivalent of a small army that is now roaming Noah's fief. By the way, Emperor Ararat asks whether the boy wants to defeat the rebels alone. But Noah does not believe that would be possible, since he is still too young and does not know the battlefield, which might cause the soldiers to reject listening to an inexperienced leader. If a prince must take command of the situation, it should be one of his brothers. The emperor admits he did not expect a negative answer, even after Noah analyzed the case objectively, but wants to know whom the boy recommends in his place. Noah recommends Henry because, given the scale of the rebellion, the best approach would be to suppress it directly, and his brother Henry, being the most prudent of the princes, should be able to act accurately. The emperor sees this as a perfect choice and orders Henry to be called. A short time later, when the 21-year-old fourth prince is summoned for the mission, he travels by carriage alongside Noah and asks why he didn't seize that opportunity, since this is a nation of warriors that values this kind of situation greatly. Noah says that it is a very sudden situation about which he knows very little, and even if he personally doesn't die, his soldiers would certainly die in large numbers. That said, Noah senses a presence through Leviathan's power and orders the carriage to stop, because now that he sees himself as the target of this problem, he doesn't want to involve his brother in it. Without delay, when a group of hooded, armed men surrounds the prince and tries to trap him with water-based snares, Noah realizes they are Almerian rebels. One of the rebels physically attacks Noah, but in return he receives a sword strike that takes him out of the fight. Even so, the other enemies charge at the 13th prince, beginning a general battle that young Ararat handles with ease, subduing each opponent with Leviathan's power until the very last one. After winning the fight, Noah receives praise from his brother for how much he has developed in such a short time. According to Henry, the rebel army is made up mainly of cavalry soldiers, and he did not expect to encounter others like these. By the way, the fourth prince wonders whether it wouldn't have been better to extract information from the attackers, but Noah explains that he didn't kill any of them, he only left them unconscious through Leviathan's intimidation after knocking them down with a blow, since the rebels would possibly take their own lives before being interrogated. Remembering what his brother said about the rebels being mostly cavalry, Noah notes that Almeria is weak in the production of war horses. The following day, he summons Byron Allen because of his business dealings near Almeria. First of all, the prince clarifies that the merchant is a dead man if this conversation leaks. And then he explains the rebellion and the possibility that the enemy army is made up mainly of cavalry. After giving 10,000 leans to the merchant, Noah orders him to buy all the horse feed. Byron Allen asks whether he should disregard human rations, and the prince says they won't be necessary. According to the young prince, Almeria has no war industry, and according to his brother Henry, it seems that the horses used for the army were bought from outside, and if that is the case, there is a limit to how much feed can be taken from the population. Byron Allen argues that if it were the soldiers' food, it would lead to looting, but that is exactly what Noah wants. Impressed with his master's intelligence, Byron Allen promises to begin the strategy right away. Soon after, in the kingdom's castle, the emperor discovers that the rebels tried to capture Noah to use him as a bargaining chip. The boy also tells his father that the captured rebel confessed far too easily, which could mean he is lying. Emperor Ararat praises his son's perception but emphasizes that there is nothing to worry about, since there is a way to find out whether someone is telling the truth. Imagining it might involve torture, Noah stays quiet because he doesn't understand anything about that. His father points out that the empire would have to make very difficult decisions if the 13th prince had been captured. He also says he is impressed that the boy chose the feed supply as his target. Noah is surprised to hear this, considering he had just ordered them to buy all the horse feed. Emperor Ararat adds that if this were only a siege, someone else could surely have had the same idea. For example, Albert, the crown prince, would have let the rebels starve so it would serve as a warning for the next rebellion. But Noah is thinking about the possibility of an invasion by his own people, and created a siege only against the horses, even using personal funds. Without a doubt, this is a very intelligent and difficult tactic, and the leader of the empire is impressed with his son's sharpness. For this reason, he allows Noah to add a sword to his coat of arms. Speechless, the young boy reflects on how the Mills Empire is a nation of warriors whose greatest symbol is the sword, and using it on a coat of arms without the supreme leader's permission can even lead to the death penalty, since it is an honor of the highest level. Finally, Emperor Ararat orders crews to issue a decree about it, and Noah expresses all his gratitude. After leaving the meeting with his father, the boy meets Byron Allen and learns that the amount of processed grain that can be transported as feed is limited. Byron Allen also says he can discover the delivery route and that monopolizing the purchase wouldn't be difficult. As for the rebel leader, Karhun, he seems to be a vengeful man capable of using any means to achieve his goals. Therefore, every precaution is necessary, even for His Highness Noah Ararat. In the middle of that, Evelyn interrupts the conversation to warn her master that there is a badly injured man at the main gate claiming to have an urgent report. When he arrives, Noah meets the man, who introduces himself as captain of a 10-soldier battalion in the province of Adra. In Almeria, he reports the rebellion and reveals that his superior was the main person responsible, but that he refused to take part and came to expose the situation. Byron Allen regrets that this is the urgent report, since Noah already knows about the rebellion, but the prince thanks him for the information, orders them to treat the wounded captain, and even asks that he be given a reward of 1,000 leans, which is a small fortune. Byron Allen questions the reason for this, since everyone already knew the information the officer brought. Noah explains that this is the best way to repay the loyalty of a man who, even seriously injured, traveled a long distance to warn them about the rebellion. Near nightfall, Zoe enters her master's office visibly pale and shaken. According to her, an unknown person gave her a pouch with about 500 leans and said it was the reward if she made the 13th prince drink a sleeping substance she now holds in her hands. Noah concludes that the rebels really do want to capture him, and asks why she didn't go ahead and do what they requested. Zoe says she would never betray her master, because he helped not only her family but her whole village. Still, she cries as she confesses that she would be killed if she didn't do what she was ordered to do. Then, the young Noah Ararat writes a check for the same amount the rebels used to try to buy the maid's betrayal, but with an extra 5,000 leans. Unable to believe such an amount, the maid says she cannot accept it, but her master insists. Above all, this is not even the biggest surprise Noah gives her, to leave the woman even more stunned. The noble says he will take the sleeping drug, and when he does, he wants Zoe to hand him over to the rebels and then flee and hide immediately, because they will obviously try to silence her. Thus, sometime later, Noah slowly opens his eyes in a hideout, where two men in another room were talking about how the last resort to prevent the prince from escaping was to kill him with their leader's sinister dagger. Noah realizes his hands and feet are tied, so he takes from inside his ear a small magic item that transforms into Leviathan. In addition, they fortunately did not remove the ring from his finger, so he uses the magical accessory to cut his ropes. Looking around, he sees that he is not in a room, but in the back of a wagon. Next, Noah asks Leviathan to show its memories. After taking the sleeping drug and falling asleep, the 13th prince was surrounded by rebels who invaded his mansion after Zoe allowed them in. However, she created a distraction and escaped. And since they couldn't miss the opportunity to take the prince, they ignored her, tied Noah Ararat up, and took him away in a cart. After seeing what happened, the prince climbs on top of the wagon and appears armed before all the rebels who were resting around a campfire. One of the men draws his sword and reminds him that the kid no longer has his brother to help him. Noah then slashes the enemy in a movement so fast that the man didn't even have time to react. After that, the boy laments that this was a useless mission, because he wanted to obtain relevant information but was kidnapped only by lower-ranking subordinates who know nothing. The rebels become furious at the audacity of this brat and attack. Noah then shows the fatal result of combining his talent with swordsmanship and Leviathan's power, even though he did not use his water magic this time. After finishing off all the enemies, the noble sees Zoe approaching from afar, accompanied by several imperial soldiers. He asks what she is doing there, since he told her to run, but Zoe couldn't bear it. She needed to see how her master was doing, because she was dying of worry. While the soldiers stared in amazement at the rebels' bodies on the ground, Zoe assumed her master had done all of that on his own. Noah ordered the captain of the platoon to deal with the corpses, but when the officer was about to pick up the sword of one of the dead men, the prince warned him at the last moment that he must not touch the weapon. To everyone's surprise, Noah told them to step back, and then a dark miasma rose from the sword, making Noah realize that this was the sinister dagger they had been talking about. The prince felt a strong killing intent coming from the dagger, and, through Leviathan, he could even sense within it the resentment of the person who had cursed the blade, manifesting the image of a man who could only be Karhun, the leader of the rebels. Leviathan, in turn, displayed all its power by releasing into the sky a miasma as black as the one coming from the weapon, and this force of shadows curved around the atmosphere to strike Karhun directly, right where he stood. The next day, once again, Noah was summoned to report to his father, who, by this point, and as always already knew about the good work his son had done the day before. In fact, the first thing he did was praise him, since the leader of the rebels had been struck in the forehead by a jet of water that appeared out of nowhere the previous night. Naturally, Emperor Ararat assumed the one responsible was Noah and his magic sword. Noah, in turn, never stops being impressed by how quickly his father gets this information. Thinking to himself, he recalls that he used the resentment embedded in the dagger as a marker, then aimed Leviathan's long-range shot at its owner and hit Karhun dead on. With that, the rebels of Almeria lost their greatest leader and were consequently suppressed by the 4th Imperial Prince, Henry. After the battle, almost everyone who planned the rebellion was arrested, and in a throne room filled with important guests, His Imperial Majesty ordered that the cattle and horses be prepared, because the entire family of those responsible would be dismembered. The nobles around him agreed with the punishment, until Noah asked to speak and surprised everyone by expressing an opinion contrary to the sentence. With a stern face, Emperor Ararat demanded an explanation, and Noah replied that the punishment must be in accordance with imperial law, which states that the leader of an act of treason must be sentenced to death by decapitation. His relatives up to the 3rd degree and his accomplices must be hanged, and the others must be beheaded depending on their level of involvement. The boy understood that if his father violated the law, it would bring chaos to the world, so he asked him to reconsider his decision. After reflecting for a few seconds, Emperor Ararat acknowledged that his son was right and thanked him for speaking, but refused to accept such a small punishment, announcing instead the maximum penalty as long as it remained within the law. With that decided, he ordered Prime Minister Noise Hill to handle the rest. Those present in the throne room were impressed by the intervention of the 13th prince, and the people of the empire only grew in their admiration for the prodigy that is Noah Ararat. Amid this, Emperor Ararat recognized that it was thanks to his son that he avoided leaving a stain on history, and therefore granted him a new title. If it were only a matter of reprimanding the emperor, any of his children could have done it. But Noah's rare quality was guiding his father toward the right thing to do. Thus, so the world may know the young man's wisdom, Emperor Ararat named Noah with the title of sage, something unheard of for a prince. The ruler even lamented that the boy had not been born earlier. With that done, the people acclaimed Imperial Prince Noah, the sage. Remembering that the knight selection would soon take place, the emperor asked whether his son had already decided how he would choose, and Noah replied that he had an idea, but preferred to show it later. In the next scene, in a courtyard of the castle, Noah took a sip from his teacup and then asked the men around him to throw on him the bucket of water they were holding. When the first servant did so, the boy's ring acted on its own and blocked the water with its magic protection, leaving Emperor Ararat astonished. The other 3 men did the same, and each time the accessory protected its user. After demonstrating his idea in practice, Noah explained that he would conduct the knight selection by having them attack him, observing how far they would advance. From this, his father understood that the idea would reduce Noah's burden and allow him to endure the long selection process without trouble. But he warned of the danger involved. If someone strong enough were present in the test, the protection might be broken. Noah, however, assured him that he was aware and prepared for that. Trusting his son's intelligence, the father did not oppose the decision and praised the ability of the new sage. In the late afternoon, in a more secluded part of the palace, Prime Minister Noise Hill commented to the emperor that it had been risky to say in public that he wished Noah had been born earlier. But Emperor Ararat saw no problem with it. After all, the boy had not only given him valuable advice, but had also killed an enemy leader without even going to the battlefield, something that had never happened before. Furthermore, as expected, the boy's magic sword confirmed that it possessed terrifying power. Standing before a staircase, Emperor Ararat ordered crews to bring the coffin resting at the top of it. According to him, legend says that Leviathan's true seal must never be broken, but perhaps Noah is capable of changing that story. As time goes by, the long-awaited moment finally arrives, the grand selection of new knights for the Mills Empire. Mills, in the ancient tongue, means warrior, which shows the value this people places on martial and military arts, since skill with weapons is the only way to rise in life through merit. Every year this event attracts a large portion of the population. But this edition has a special occurrence. An imperial prince has taken on the role of selection chief, something unprecedented. Because of that, even more people showed up to see Noah Ararat in person. When the next candidate is called to attack the prince, he unleashes a strike with his sword. But Noah, calm and drinking his tea, is easily protected by his magic accessory. No matter how many times the man strikes, the shield protects its user. In the end, it is the attacker's sword that ends up breaking. Watching the event from afar, Cruz comments that this year's event seems to be more exciting than the previous ones. But all that matters to the emperor is the result. After all, this date exists to select knights, and Emperor Ararat is eager to see whom his son will choose. Next, the following candidate launches a fire spell toward the prince. The fact that the boy's body becomes surrounded by dangerous flames leaves the people tense, but despite the sorcerer's great effort, a different magic shield protects the young sage, leaving him unharmed. Noah reflects that the sun is already setting, and so far he has not seen anyone who stands out, which begins to worry him. Today's test ends with the next participant, a warrior in armor who tries to control her anxiety through breathing. After a few seconds, she attacks Noah with a thrust, and this time the sword pierces the shield from the ring. determined to break the protection completely. The warrior pushes forward and starts to crack the entire shield until it shatters into many fragments. With the force she was using, the woman grazes the prince's arm, and 2 guards run in to restrain her. However, Noah himself demands that the candidate be released and asks for her name. With her head lowered, fearing severe punishment, she introduces herself as Shirley Grants, until the prince, to everyone's surprise, declares Shirley Grants approved. Later, the sage personally meets the new knight at his house and asks whether that beautiful armor belongs to her. Shirley Grants replies that it is equipment passed down through generations in her family. But changing the subject, she admits she did not understand why she was approved, since she made a huge mistake. Noah directly mentions the crime of having accidentally injured the imperial prince, but he reminds her that he was the one who gave the order to be attacked. He then tells Shirley to stand and strike at him again, proving her obedience as a knight. With that, the woman follows the order, and after breathing again to focus, she delivers another thrust that is blocked by the ring's shield, and this time it does not come close to breaking. Noah explains that he would have defended himself properly if he had truly wanted to at that moment. In other words, he allowed himself to be injured. According to the noble, the foundation of a knight is to value orders, and he wanted to know whether Shirley would be loyal to his commands, attacking seriously as instructed, which she did on both occasions. Thus, Shirley Grants swears total loyalty to His Highness, the Imperial Prince, amused by the warrior's dramatic posture. Noah checks her status and notices that Shirley was the one whose ability increased the most. At that moment, Zoe enters the office accompanied by Gutto Chloe, a court doctor who will examine Noah's condition. The prince considers it an exaggeration, but understands the intention of those who care for him. The doctor soon assesses the situation and points out that, fortunately, the sword strike did not hit any bone or tendon. Noah notices Shirley is impressed by something and asks why, and she explains that there are no doctors in her village, so she had never seen anyone treat cuts in this way. In that case, the sage asks how they handle the injured and sick, and Shirley says the elder prays for everyone and drives away the source of illness. The doctor comments that this is common in poorer villages, while Noah, considering that the shortest path to becoming a doctor is becoming a disciple, announces his first order to his knight: bring intelligent children from her village so that Gutto Chloe may take them in as apprentices. Noah will cover all the costs of this operation, so that these children may become doctors who, in the future, can take care of the people in the village. Unable to believe what she is hearing, Shirley bows emotionally and thanks him, but Noah points out that a knight must not bow like that, but rather act according to etiquette. The next day, Shirley Grants puts on her armor and, upon descending from her new room, finds Zoe in a hallway. Zoe wants to know if the knight slept well, but Shirley admits she did not, since the room is still strange to her. Speaking of which, she notes that even the servant's mansion is impressive in this place, which is not very common when dealing with an imperial prince. As they walk, they end up encountering a few maids talking among themselves about who should be the master's future wife. Shirley points out that the kid is only 6 years old, but Rihanna highlights that the other imperial princes married before the age of 15. One maid asks whether Ange, Lady Almeria's attendant, would be a good choice, since she is from the master's territory, and the others think it is a great idea except Zoe, who does not think such conversation is appropriate. On the other hand, another worker, observing from afar, remarks that this only shows the popularity of the sage prince. For example, a few cafes were opened near Noah's mansion, thanks to the number of women who gather in the area hoping to see the prince. Rihanna comments that even Evelyn says there is no other imperial prince as kind as this one, and then teases Zoe, asking how much she admires the boy so much that she even started learning magic recently to keep the master extra safe. Feeling awkward, Zoe argues that she's only trying to serve the prince as best she can, then walks away to ease the pressure from the other girls. Later, Noah Ararat receives this year's night selection report from Rowan Green. According to the commander, the recruits are first-rate thanks to the method the prince created, and the Night Corps is deeply grateful for such excellent newcomers. With that, Noah writes a formal note of thanks to everyone who helped organize the event, then asks his knight to escort their guest outside the mansion. While Rowan Green prepares his horse, Shirley bows and thanks him for coming. At that moment, the man understands why the prince sent Shirley to accompany him. It was to show the new knight how it's truly done. Even so, as he mounts his horse and begins to depart, Rowan Green leaves her with one piece of veteran advice: there are no mistakes in following such a great person unless she stops putting in the effort. That night, Noah Ararat hosts a party at his mansion, where Alichi is the special guest performing her songs. Byron Allen attends with his daughter Cindy, both there to celebrate the success of the night selection. Noah says this event is for everyone, so everyone should take part. But aside from that, he mentions that the guests are merchants with deep ties to the 13th Imperial Prince, and that it would be important for all of them to strengthen their friendships as well. As he finishes speaking, Noah begins to applaud when Alichi ends her song, and the other guests follow. Zoe approaches the master with a letter addressed to him, even though she had hesitated at some point to hand it over. Sensing trouble, Noah opens the letter in a quiet spot. It doesn't say who sent it. According to Zoe, the gate guard said the person who delivered it ran off immediately afterward. Worried, Shirley asks if she can do anything. But while Leviathan trembles inside its master's sheath, Noah says everything is fine. It seems the remaining Almerian rebels are still making worrying moves, and Noah believes the one who sent the letter is infiltrated and investigating the matter, likely the soldier who came to warn them about the rebellion. Zoe recalls that he seemed extremely loyal and must be returning the reward he received. But Noah points out that acting as an intermediary could get him killed at any moment if he's discovered. Since his brother Henry is still in Almeria, the sage will send a messenger to make him stop. Some time later, Noah receives another letter and laments that the soldier was tortured, just as expected. Noah wishes he had spoken, because keeping his secret cost him terrible punishment. Henry's troops rescued him, but the soldier remains unconscious, which Noah sees as his own responsibility. Shirley and Zoe completely disagree, but the prince believes he could have avoided all of this if he had figured it out sooner, putting into practice what his father said about information being a weapon. Either way, he orders Zoe to contact Almeria and spare no expense to keep the man alive, using every doctor and every medicine necessary. After giving the order, the boy reflects that it isn't worth sacrificing people with great loyalty in exchange for a single piece of information. Eventually, Noah walks through the streets with his knight, who is impressed by the marketplace, having never seen anything like it. She asks what he came to do, and he says he wants to buy a gift for his brother Henry, in thanks for the battle against the rebellion and for everything involving the letter. Upon arriving at Alan Bardsley's shop, the Imperial Prince is shown several new items that arrived, refined accessories of incalculable value, with a shine so intense that Shirley is left speechless. Among so many expensive items, Noah shows interest in something covered by a cloth, since it looks different from the rest. When the cloth is removed, a beautiful glass statue is revealed, flawlessly crafted by a master artisan of rare talent, a piece left behind by Lindsay. According to Alan Bardsley, the technique used to create it has been lost, and only 2 statues of this goddess remain. Noah gives 10,000 for the statue, plus a bonus for Bardsley bringing something beyond what he expected. At that moment, the 8th Imperial Prince, Oscar Ararat, enters the shop after hearing his brother was there. Seeing the glass statue, Oscar immediately notices it was made by Lindsay after all. He owns the other one, the second piece the seller mentioned. Hearing this, and leaving everyone stunned, Noah simply walks up to the statue and throws it to the ground, shattering the valuable sculpture into pieces. With Alan Bardsley still in shock, Noah hands him more money as compensation for the trouble, and asks him to spread the rumor that the second statue simply broke. Oscar praises the boy's cleverness, since having only one statue left will send its value soaring. According to Oscar, he only gained that kind of insight after becoming an adult with his own territory. The 8th prince then leaves, and Noah still needs to find another gift for his brother Henry. Overjoyed with the day's profit, Alan Bardsley goes to look for another item that might please the sage. Near nightfall, after leaving the shop, the boy asks what Shirley is thinking, since she is clearly restless. The knight admits that she hasn't stopped being surprised since she began serving His Highness, and even today, although she understood the logic behind it, she points out that it was still an extremely high-level treasure. On the other hand, Noah sees the statue as just an ordinary object, not a true treasure. To the Imperial Prince, the people who risk their lives to deliver information, who work hard to meet expectations, who swear loyalty to Noah Ararat and do everything they can to be useful, those are the true treasures. And Shirley Grants is one of them. Hearing those words, Shirley can't help but feel impressed, to the point of promising that she will follow her master for the rest of her life. As for the young sage, all he can think about is gathering more treasures until the day he receives a fief in his adulthood. 6 years later, Noah Ararat walks through the central corridor of his mansion and is greeted by his attendants, who bow before their master. Accompanied by Shirley and Zoe, The 13th Imperial Prince of Mills heads toward the carriage parked at the entrance of his mansion. In the next moment, alone at a gigantic table, and being served by his maids, 12-year-old Imperial Prince Noah Ararat hears from the newcomer Gigi how incredible it is that the line of people bringing him gifts still hasn't ended even after 3 days. Zoe comments that it's no surprise, since last year it lasted a whole week, which leaves Gigi even more impressed. Noah adds that it really does take a long time, since he needs to receive all the gifts, record who sent them, and what was given. With that said, when the Imperial Prince stands up, Zoe reflects that he, at 12, was recognized for perfectly mastering the Leviathan magic sword, and that by order of the Emperor, he was sent to the Military Human Resources Department to carry out an inspection. Speaking of that, Noah heads to the responsible Minister of War, his brother Henry Ararat. Henry summoned the boy to ask for his opinion. The Emperor issued an imperial order for General Rice Cake to lead an army to suppress a rebellion in the southern border zone, where the regular army is to be sent to teach those barbarians a lesson. Hearing this, Noah looks at Rice Cake and thinks about how, besides being a courageous man, he also has talent for leading an army. Among the knights who serve Henry, he is certainly one who stands out. Suddenly, Noah surprises everyone by asking Rice Cake what the real number of soldiers is, leaving the man speechless. Faced with the silence, he reinforces the question about the true number of the regular army that General Cake commands. Smelling something suspicious, Henry wants to know what the subordinate is hiding, so Rice Cake kneels and asks for forgiveness, provoking the wrath of the 4th Imperial Prince. However, Noah explains that it's nothing serious. After all, according to the number of soldiers registered in the regular army of the Empire, the Ministry of Finance releases a budget that matches that number. In other words, people who are not actually soldiers, those who do small tasks, merchants, and collaborators are registered, and it's common for them to reimburse that portion of the budget. For that reason, Noah asks Rice Cake not to be afraid, since increasing the number of soldiers is a general's right, and inflating the true size of the army can scare the enemy. Henry ends up agreeing, since even if the real number isn't that high, saying he commands an army of 100,000 men can have a positive effect. That is why the 4th Prince praises his younger brother's deep intelligence, which is already expected. However, Noah states that this time is different, considering that the Emperor's order is for the victory to be overwhelming, and that is why he asked how many people are being hidden within those numbers. Rice Cake responds that it's around 2,000 people, so Noah orders him to replenish those numbers. After writing a letter, the young sage orders Rice Cake to deliver it to the Ministry of Finance, so the expense will be treated as miscellaneous costs and more money can be released equivalent to 2,000 people. But in exchange for this additional investment, the prince makes it clear that he will not forgive a defeat from the general. When the meeting ends, while the two princes are carried in different carriages, Henry asks whether his brother has ever experienced a war, and he says no. Noah reflects that even though he is 12, he is still at level 1 because of the imperial household law, since it is common for imperial children to die young. Publicly, they say it's due to an epidemic, but in general, it is a power struggle where some even resort to poisoning. Because of this violence against them, heirs can only go to war through a direct order from the Emperor, and that only happens once they are fully grown. On the other hand, Henry points out that Noah is already 12, and that he would appear more respectable if he had that experience before taking charge of a fief, especially because the boy has a magic sword and should be fine. Speaking of that, Noah wants to know when his brother fought in his first battle. But before he can answer, a ragged little girl steps in front of the carriage and begs for help. Other children in the same condition come running, until several adults appear to capture them. Quickly, Noah gets out of the carriage and orders the men to stop, not recognizing who he is. The man in front tells the kid to stop meddling in other people's business. Noah then asks to see the man's registration and asks for the name of his shop, since, according to imperial law, trading people without a license is a serious crime. Knowing they are in the wrong, the trio of criminals doesn't even answer the question and immediately attacks. Faced with the situation, Noah Ararat draws his sword and lands a quick blow on each of the criminals, impressing the crowd watching with such fast and precise movements. After that, the Imperial Prince confirms that the men were slave traders, and the little girl, crying, explains that she and the other children were going to bring in good money. According to those men, suddenly, a hooded old man appears from an alley and reveals that he does business using children like them. He is about to say his name, but decides it's better not to. Noah asks why, and he answers that it's because he works for the first Imperial Prince, Gilbert. Immediately, Noah realizes that the man is using Gilbert's name to shake off the problem. When the old man directly asks Noah to forget what he saw today, the boy asks his brother whether he knows who this man is. And when Henry says no, Noah strikes the man down at once with his power and says he is lying about working for the first imperial prince. He then orders that all the criminals be taken to Gilbert so he can personally deal with them. Since he was mentioned publicly, the children, however, must be sent to Noah's mansion. By making these decisions, Noah admits privately to Henry that he does not know whether those men were really frauds. But even if they were employees of Gilbert, he thought it best to deny it publicly so everything could be handled without an unwanted audience. At his mansion, while dining beside his brother, Noah is informed by the butler that Gilbert interrogated the scoundrel and discovered that he really had been conducting business in his name. He intended to deliver the fraudster to the court the very next day, but his men were careless, and the criminal ended up taking his own life. With that said, Noah thinks about the conclusion he reached that people are like precious treasures. He then questions whether the human trafficking in the underworld had been done under Gilbert's orders, and Henry confirms that it had, since their older brother had always owned shops, bought land, and was obsessed with that kind of nonsense. Noah concludes there is nothing to be done about it, because even though Gilbert is the first prince, he is the son of a woman outside the emperor's marriage and cannot inherit the throne. And perhaps that is why he gets involved in so many questionable businesses. After dinner, Noah gathers the children and tells them they will not be sold anymore, so they are free. When asked, the children confess they have nowhere to go. One of them, for example, was sold to pay for this year's rice seeds, while another had been sold to pay for his mother's funeral. Hearing these answers, no one knows these kids would be sold again if they returned to their parents' homes, so he decides to take all of them in. He then tells Dylan to find a place for them to sleep, work for each of them, and education for those who wish to study. The little girl asks if the sage will do them the favor of buying them, but Noah explains that he will not buy anyone, and that they may leave if they want to. On the other hand, the only thing the prince does not forgive is betrayal. With that, Dylan leads the children away after they thank him for everything. And as they leave, Noah once again thinks about people being treasures, and that gives him an idea. The next day, he gives Evelyn a letter of appointment, making her the governing authority of a small territory in Almeria, thus becoming a full official, an achievement simply unimaginable for someone who used to be just a maid. Since Almeria is a large territory and Noah would not be able to manage everything alone, he made a point of promoting his loyal subordinate, who will be one among other governors who will also be appointed as his representatives in his fief. According to Noah, he noticed that Evelyn is the smartest of the maids, and it would be a waste for her to simply receive visitors in the mansion. Shocked by such an unexpected announcement, Evelyn sincerely reaffirms her desire to serve her master, Noah Ararat, with even more dedication. The boy already expected that, but insists that she must do a good job in her new territory above all else, because that will prove that Noah knows how to recognize talent. After Evelyn's departure, Shirley Grants becomes excited and comments that Noah treats people completely differently from the first prince. But she is reprimanded by Noah himself, since that is something that cannot be said. Even so, when the prince leaves, the knight keeps telling herself that her master is still amazing. Next, Noah responds to a summons from Emperor Ararat, who already knows through the report that his youngest son preserved Gilbert's honor. The boy explains that it was only a coincidence while arresting a lawbreaker, and privately thinks that Gilbert himself must have written that report instead of hiding the truth. He made it look as if he had done nothing wrong. Considering that there truly was a criminal, Emperor Ararat asks what the punishment is for an underworld slave trafficker. Noah replies that, for human trade without authorization, the leader's punishment is the amputation of his dominant hand, while the others are forced to serve in the army. When asked, the Prime Minister confirms that this is exactly what the law states. But before returning to the matter, the Emperor wants to know whether his son was hurt, since he heard that the criminals went into a frenzy and attacked him. When the boy says that he was fortunately able to fight back, Emperor Ararat realizes he didn't even need to worry about him. If it had been himself in that situation, the Emperor believes he would have been beaten while hesitating to announce his name. If that were the case, the Prime Minister says the attackers would receive the death penalty for the crime of lèse-majesté. But Noah strongly disagrees, because if the Emperor fails to announce who he is, the crime of lèse-majesté does not apply, it becomes simple bodily injury. Hearing this, the people present in the meeting are shocked, and even Noah starts wondering whether he said too much, since he spoke so bluntly to the empire's highest authority and contradicted the Prime Minister in public. The boy begins to sweat and prepares to ask for forgiveness, until Emperor Ararat bursts into laughter and says he won the bet he made with the Prime Minister. Noah wants to know what is going on, so his father explains that he had bet Noah would quote the law at some point during the meeting. In fact, noticing how strict the boy is with legal matters, the emperor decides to appoint him as Minister of Justice. Immediately, those around them celebrate the second prince who has now been appointed to such an important position, just as Henry once had been. After the meeting, as night falls, Noah Ararat visits his tavern, where the singer Alachi performs on stage. Thinking about what happened earlier, he realizes he gave a poor answer and was still appointed Minister of Justice, which makes him question whether there is something behind that decision. Meanwhile, Alachi begins a song and enchants the audience, who see her as the greatest singer in the kingdom today, with a voice that seems to wash the soul of anyone who hears it. Hearing the melody, Noah decides it is not the time to think about politics. As the song continues, we see scenes of Evelyn being celebrated by her fellow maids for being promoted to a representative of part of the fief. Meanwhile, in Noah Ararat's mansion, the children who were about to be sold are now eating freely with smiles on their faces, while Shirley Grant trains intensely with her sword, even though it is so late. On the other hand, upon hearing some news, the second prince, Albert Ararat, becomes furious and throws a wine glass at the wall. Back in the throne room, the Prime Minister confirms that a certain piece of information is indeed correct, so the emperor tells him to deal with it immediately, since time no longer allows for delay. In the next moment, the imperial prince Noah Ararat is welcomed by the staff as he arrives at the Ministry of Justice for the first time. Once inside his office, he receives a visit from his vice minister, who introduces himself as Vaini Augie. Imagining that this young man rose quickly in life because of his age, Noah asks what his role is, and Vaini replies that there are two crucial points. First, coordinating the courts of each region of the Mills Empire, conducting trials for incidents that occurred in the imperial capital. In more serious crimes, such as the rebellion that happened 6 years ago, it is tradition for the Minister of Justice, or even the Emperor, to carry out the judgment personally. Noah asks whether the Vice Minister also judges cases, and he says yes, if necessary. Moving straight into the next question, the boy wants to know how much Vaini earns in bribes, a question that leaves the man sweating cold. Noah explains that he is not asking as a form of persecution, but to understand how things work there, so the Vice Minister must answer honestly. Impressed by the young noble's sharpness, Vaini says he is one of the few who do not accept bribes, but he believes that the officials involved in the scheme make a few hundred liens per year. Now, since he is selective in the choices he makes, he believes his subordinates receive 10 times that amount. Noah asks what kind of choices he means, and Vaini explains that he does not take murder cases because that puts a target on his back. Since the guilty party usually wants revenge against the one who condemned them, he only accepts cases in which the decision could fall to either side. With that said, Noah signs a check and hands it to the Vice Minister, saying that if he earns 500 liens per year, he will now receive 10 times more, 5,000, but only if he stops doing that kind of thing while the new minister is there. After all, Noah wants to meet the emperor's expectations and needs his vice minister's help for that. Shocked, Vaini understands why such a young boy was appointed to such an important position, but he refuses the money and insists that he would never accept a bribe. In any case, he will give his all to be the best professional possible in this new administration of the ministry. Regarding that, Noah would normally suspect anyone's intentions, but for some reason, he trusts this man, so he says he will count on him from today on. At night, Noah attends a dinner organized by his brother Oscar Ararat, who wanted to celebrate the fact that their father, in his 50 years of rule, appointed the second imperial prince as Minister of Labor. According to Oscar, it may not seem like it sometimes, but he likes his younger brother very much and wants to be by his side at this important moment. On that note, Noah wants to understand why the emperor appointed 2 imperial princes as ministers in sequence, and Oscar supposes it is simply because their father is very fond of his son. Noah considers the possibility, since he thinks his brother Henry Ararat was appointed for the fair reason of suppressing a rebellion. But as for the boy himself, having no great achievement of that level on his record might make others think he is just the father's favorite. Thinking about that, the boy reminds his brother of the story of when the empire was once on the brink of collapse because of the crown prince system used at the time. With an heir already chosen from birth, the other princes simply spent their lives partying and undermining the empire's internal affairs. However, when that law changed, each prince received a fief and had production and development goals to fulfill. With that said, Noah asks whether his brother does not consider that appointing ministers goes beyond what would be considered good development. Understanding what the youngest meant, Oscar Ararat rises from his chair in shock, interrupting the musicians playing around the table, as he considers the possibility that the emperor might be thinking of changing the heir. At that moment, Oscar receives information from a eunuch to whom he gives bribes. Apparently, the prince will be appointed Minister of Finance at tomorrow's meeting, and this makes Noah wonder what his father thinks of Albert Ararat. To bring back a lighter mood, Oscar proposes a toast to his younger brother's appointment. Meanwhile, in the middle of the city, a house is raided by imperial soldiers, who interrupt a meeting of several men who seem to be planning something. Sometime after this operation, the Prime Minister tells the Emperor that, besides Keats, 167 people were arrested. The conspirators wanted His Majesty to abdicate the throne so that Crown Prince Albert Ararat would take over upon becoming the retired emperor. In any case, the person responsible confessed to the plan. With a deep sigh, Emperor Ararat notes that he has ruled for 50 years 35 as crown prince, so he imagines his son can no longer bear waiting. Speaking of which, Noisahil reveals that there is not a single piece of evidence of Albert's involvement, but the emperor says he already knew that and will not do anything against him. So Keats must be executed and the matter closed. With that decided, Ararat wants to know about Oscar's case, and the Prime Minister says he recently sent the eunuch with whom the prince has a friendly relationship. But it seems Oscar had already guessed something, and it is worth noting that Noah was in the same place. With that information, the Emperor assumes it was the boy who realized his intention, which matches what Noisahil had learned. As always, the father praises the intelligence his son constantly demonstrates. On the other hand, he laments that Gilbert and Albert are not suited to take the throne, which makes him wonder who could be his successor. In the Emperor's mind, any of his remaining children could reach that position, but they will need to overcome some trials. Sometime later, Noah receives a report listing the accomplices and leaders of the recent rebellion, and he laments that they all have a close relationship with his brother Albert Ararat, which can only imply that the crown prince is forming a faction to take the throne. By the laws of the empire, even if the imperial family breaks a law, Noah knows there is always an article that softens the punishment for those born with a silver spoon, but the only exception is when the crime involves treason. In that case, it doesn't matter if the offender is an imperial prince, he will be beheaded along with everyone involved, even those who knew about the betrayal but did not tell the emperor. In the end, considering this list full of people close to his brother, it becomes impossible for his brother not to have known anything. If the suspicion is correct, Noah knows this scandal would be big enough to shake the very structure of the empire. He asks the vice minister whether the emperor said anything, and Vini Augi tells him that the order was simply to follow the original text, giving an appropriate punishment to those involved. Understanding his father's intention, Noah feels ready to deliver the sentence. Next, he meets Emperor Ararat to say he has decided what to do about the treason case. Only for those who were arrested, the main culprits will be beheaded, while the remaining accomplices will receive the death penalty, to be carried out immediately. Young Noah explains that he limited the punishment to these individuals because, at the moment, they do not intend to involve his brother in the case, and if that is so, only the ones listed will be punished. By the way, the prince suggests that the execution could be rescheduled for the time of year when all executions are carried out at once. But if, through a pardon, there is any risk of exposing Albert's involvement, then the only option is immediate execution, considering that everything is still within the law. With that said, the emperor praises his son's work and summons crews to add 1,000 leans to Noah's current salary. Receiving a raise for something so small, Noah understands that his father truly does not want Albert involved. Soon after, the emperor steps forward, places a hand on the boy's shoulder, and asks him to continue working hard, because there are great expectations surrounding him. After the meeting, Noah returns home and is surprised to find the bodies of his guards dead at the entrance. One of the men, still alive, struggles to say that the intruders are still inside. Noah quickly tells Shirley to go to the Ministry of War to report what happened to Oscar, but changes his mind after briefly reflecting on the situation. He then orders the knight to gather all their allies there and not let anyone in or out except for him, not even an imperial prince. After giving his orders, the boy runs into his mansion with the Leviathan in hand, until he finds an intruder finishing off a man. Without wasting time, Noah easily controls the fight and delivers deep cuts to the opponent's arms and legs. The man tries to take his own life quickly, but the prince stops him at the last moment with the help of his magic accessory. However, the problem is far from over, and soon 3 more intruders discover the boy's presence and charge at him with swords, yet all of them meet the same fate as the first thug. Viney Algae arrives soon after and is impressed to see that Noah Ararat defeated all these armed criminals. When asked about the situation, he explains that everyone who participated in the treason was killed, and this leads Noah to the conclusion that they were sent by the crown prince. To the vice minister's surprise and despair, Noah cuts his own stomach with his sword, then claims he was wounded by the criminals and asks the vice minister what the heaviest sentence is for gravely injuring an imperial prince. When Viney replies that it is immediate execution, Noah tells him to carry it out quickly. Some time later, Noah's wound is treated, and Viney Algae arrives to inform him that the sentence has been fulfilled. With that, the boy declares the matter closed. Setting that aside, the vice minister emphasizes how impressive it was to see the minister do everything he did. But Noah cannot stop thinking about the next step in this chess game. After all, if they make a wrong move regarding the crown prince, the entire empire will tremble. One day later, the boy responds to a summons from the emperor in the throne room. Knowing everything that happened, Ararat asks how skilled the intruders must have been to wound the wielder of the Leviathan. For his part, aware of how deep and effective his father's information network is, Noah imagines the emperor already knows he wounded himself. Either way, the boy explains that strength is not limited to battle skill, because no matter how skilled someone is, if their mental weakness is exposed, that person will end up hesitating. The emperor replies that it makes sense and highlights the pride he feels for his son, and Noah assumes his father understands that the measure he took came only after much reflection. According to Ararat, it would be a great help if everyone were like Noah, so he calls the boy to take a walk outside. Once in the garden, Ararat says that 9 out of 10 emperors who can be called wise rulers stain their own reputations in the final years of their reign. Hearing this, Noah imagines the subject is related to the crown prince's betrayal. While observing the wide view from the balcony, the boy thinks about how his father led the country into a golden age never seen before, so it is likely he will be described as a wise ruler by future generations. On the other hand, if the rebellion had succeeded, the books would portray him as an old man who went senile and couldn't even control his own son. One way or another, what is clear is that the emperor no longer trusts the crown prince, but does not want to do anything about it for now, because deposing his own heir would tarnish the final years of his reign, just as he had just mentioned. Apologizing for his boldness, Noah says he has a request to make. Considering that he and his brothers Henry and Oscar were appointed as ministers, it is indeed a great honor. But it is also known that none of them have experience with the position and will obviously make mistakes in the future. Therefore, it would be great to have someone who could coordinate them. Ararat asks whether the prime minister would be suitable, but Noah replies that he wouldn't. In fact, he suggests choosing someone with a title that implies they command everything, a position above the princes. As an example, he proposes creating a new role called Imperial Prince Prime Minister, and recommends giving that position to the crown prince. Hearing this, the emperor immediately scowls and dismisses the idea without a second thought as he leaves his son standing there. However, Noah emphasizes that he understands his brother's impatience, since he has been waiting in line for the throne for 35 years. Therefore, the idea would be to let Albert Ararat play at acting like the emperor, while the real one still keeps the power to make the final decision. Even so, Ararat points out that Albert would still be above the ministers, meaning he could end up rejecting important matters that might never even reach the emperor. To prevent that, Noah recommends that each imperial prince minister have the right to appeal directly to the emperor. So without going through the prime minister, they would have the right to go personally to the emperor. With that, the boy imagines that the crown prince would have no real power in practice, having only a title that exists on paper. In the end, Emperor Ararat acknowledges the brilliance of his youngest son's idea and once again laments that he wasn't born earlier. Noah, in turn, genuinely intends to prevent his father's reputation from being tarnished, since this is the best way for the people to live peacefully. Wanting to reward the boy somehow for his suggestion, the father summons Oscar so they can head to the treasury room. Once inside, considering that Noah had a good evaluator's eye when he discovered his magic ring, the emperor would like the boy to test that ability once again with any item of his choice. Accepting the challenge, Noah takes a few steps forward and tells Leviathan to activate its search mode. Then, after a few seconds of scanning, the boy is led to a small box which, when opened, surrounds Noah's body with flames. We then learn that the Mills Empire rules over a vast expanse of land, where the emperor and his family oversee every responsibility that exists within this territory. For example, internal matters involving law and finance, as well as diplomatic issues where internal disputes and international negotiations are mediated. Beyond that, the emperor is personally responsible for the private affairs of the royal family, which follows its own set of laws. During this time, Noah receives a statement written by Graham Ararat, the emperor's brother. Having already read the letter, the emperor explains that his brother's son governs his domain with extreme tyranny and, to make things worse, killed someone during an argument while he was drunk. Obviously, that is a serious crime, but Graham, the boy's father, declared that he failed to supervise his son properly and personally offered to pay the bail. Noah replies that, unfortunately, according to imperial law, Prince Graham has not committed any crime, because just as a child has no obligation to pay a parent's debts, a parent is not responsible for the crimes of their children. Ararat had already pointed this out to his brother, but it seems the man is trying to buy himself some inner peace. When Noah sees that the bail would be around 30,000 rians, he calculates that this amount is 250 times the capital's annual income, an absurd sum. The father asks what the boy thinks, and Noah says that it wouldn't be right to collect bail from someone who hasn't committed a crime, even if they offered the money. The emperor wonders whether it might be time to revise the law to allow voluntary bail payments, especially considering that the national treasury is in terrible condition, since suppressing revolts and repairing disasters has been costing a huge amount of money. When he hears this, Noah understands why his father is trying to steer the conversation in that direction. But he stresses that legalizing voluntary bail would send the message that anyone with enough money could get away with murder simply by paying for it, which would certainly increase corruption among the wealthy and infest the government. The empire's finances are indeed a serious problem, but one that must be resolved through respectable means. Agreeing with his son's point, Ararat signs a document and, to honor the young ruler's wisdom, grants Noah the position of chief advisor. With the document in hand, Noah suddenly gets an idea. Propose that the empire allow not bail payments to escape punishment, but payments made to earn honor. For example, those who donate thousands of rians to the empire could be rewarded with an honorary knight title. Naturally, they would have to impose certain restrictions to ensure no one abuses this privilege, but it would certainly be a strong incentive for the treasury if people could receive this title personally from the emperor. At the same time, having lived another life before this one, Noah knows that when men have more money than they can spend, they begin to desire things beyond material possessions. Impressed, the emperor orders crews to summon Oscar Ararat immediately. After bowing to his father, Noah suddenly remembers an unresolved matter at the Ministry of Justice and asks for permission to leave. In truth, the boy needs to think through this issue as quickly as possible, because it might end up causing him to interfere in the domain of his brother Oscar Ararat. On his way out of the castle, Noah is stopped by a man named Shizu. Nearby, several men were looking into a deep hole surrounding a small patch of land that remained intact. According to Shizu, these people couldn't understand how the ground could melt like that, and someone had even fallen into the hole trying to figure out what was going on. Noah hands Shizu a bag of money to arrange treatment for the injured man. He then asks what the man is carrying, and Shizu shows him a jar containing 2 beetles, something he had procured by order of the 16th prince, who is only 3 years old and loves watching rhinoceros beetles fight. With that on his mind, Noah gets inside his carriage and heads toward his home. He uses his new magic accessory together with the old one, each of which summons small creatures called Leviathan and Luthier, and he makes the two fight each other. With that, the boy notices that the summons really do retain the techniques of their former owners. You can learn quite a bit just by watching. Even though Leviathan has a clear advantage over Luthier, Gigi Rihanna steps in after Leviathan wins and, impressed, asks whether that was some kind of magic. Since she enjoyed the show, Noah summons the defeated fighter again and reflects that unlike the loyal Leviathan, Luthier seems to have a much more competitive personality, and this behavioral difference might give Noah the chance to learn how to diversify his own fighting style. Suddenly, the boy looks at his status window and sees that he has leveled up to 2, which can only mean one thing. When he gets home, Noah Ararat seems even more absorbed in the fight between the 2 avatars. Hours later, Leviathan continues winning every duel. However, Luthier has just earned his first victory, and his development causes Noah to gain a boost in his fire status. At that moment, the sage asks Zoe to step in, and she activates a buff that makes him level up to 3. Impressed, she admits she has never seen someone level up without needing to fight, and asks whether the master is planning to make the avatars fight each other forever. Noah replies that it isn't that simple, because to evolve to level 2, he only needed the avatars to fight once, but to evolve to level 3, he needed around 10 fights, which suggests that fighting the same opponent repeatedly isn't very efficient. But to be certain, he needs to find other magical items. Hearing the conversation from a distance, the fourth prince, Henry Ararat, approaches and comments that making a magic sword leap at a ring is exactly the kind of contraption he would expect from this boy. Since the topic has come up, Henry places a box on the table and says the monster nest has finally developed, reminding Noah that his first war campaign is approaching. Regarding the monster nest, the boy examines it, knowing it is an item managed by the military minister to be used in the first campaign of every prince. According to Henry, once his brother touched the box, he would have an idea of how many soldiers he should bring for that mission. And when it happened, even the fourth prince was taken aback when he saw the card with nothing but the number 1 printed on it, which meant that Noah Ararat alone was enough to complete the task, something that had never happened before. Naturally, Henry emphasized just how incredible the boy was. Next, Noah received a visit at home from someone claiming to bring news from His Majesty. Soon, Rias Keiki entered the room. Since he represented the emperor, Noah bowed and treated the envoy as if he were his own father. Rias then announced that the 13th prince's first campaign would be postponed and that he should remain attentive to future orders. After that, the envoy bowed and said it was good to see His Highness again. And Noah mentioned that Rias Keiki was a direct subordinate of the fourth prince, Henry Ararat. From time to time, members of the imperial family sent some of their slaves or servants to serve as officers, and those who reached that level came to be considered government officials or direct subordinates of royalty, no longer bound to their previous duties. Noah asked why the campaign was being delayed, and Rias explained that it was solely because of the 13th prince's strength. Once the emperor was impressed by the revelation from the box, he personally decided to reserve the sage for a conflict of greater scale. At that moment, His Majesty was working with Henry and the 8th prince to find a way to show how important Noah was to the empire. The next day, accompanied by his personal knight, the boy returned to Alan Bardsley's shop in search of another magical item that possessed a will of its own. Alan regretted not having anything of that sort in his establishment, but since Noah had already assumed such an item wouldn't be easy to find, the prince handed over a large amount of gold and asked the merchant to contact him if he found anything worthy of that price, and if he came across equipment of rare quality, he would be rewarded even more. As they left the shop, Shirley Grants couldn't believe her master had left so much money with a seller who didn't even have a product in hand. Noah explained that this was how nobles did business. At that moment, the pair saw a customer hitting a merchant because, apparently, he wanted to buy a product that had already been reserved for someone else. When the imperial prince ordered him to stop, the aggressor pretended to be polite and introduced himself as Dalem, a member of the house of Prince Gilbert Ararat. Noah accused him of intimidating that person, but Dalem argued that, as Minister of Justice, the boy should know that members of the ministry of the imperial household could not be accused of any crime other than rebellion or treason. With a mocking expression, he made it quite clear he didn't want to hear what the boy had to say. Upon learning of the man's privileged status, Noah understood why he was so arrogant and so certain he wouldn't be punished for his actions. But instead of staying silent, remembering that Dalem was part of his brother's house, Noah questioned why he remained standing before another prince. After all, just like the day before, when Noah knelt before Rias and vice versa, that was the proper behavior between members of different houses. Dalem hurried to justify himself, but Noah used this as a pretext to order Shirley to arrest him. The man even had the audacity to try attacking the knight, but she subdued him easily. Annoyed, Noah stressed to the crowd around them that Dalem had tarnished the name of the first prince, Gilbert Ararat, with his abusive behavior and had acted rudely toward the 13th prince. For that reason, he would be punished according to the imperial family's internal law. And Noah asked if any peasant nearby had a whip. Soon, Dalem was tied to a post in the middle of the market, shouting and promising that this wouldn't end well. Shirley asked how many lashes she should give, and Noah, considering that if it were a member of his own house tyrannizing the people that way, he wouldn't hesitate to sentence them to death, simply left and allowed his knight to finish the punishment with a whip. Sitting on a nearby bench, after some time, the boy received word that the criminal had taken his final breath and that law officers had already arrived. He ordered Shirley to tell the officers exactly what he had described earlier about the crimes committed by the member of Gilbert Ararat's house. Finally, he told her to bring a pair of shackles. Late in the afternoon, Noah Ararat arrived at the first prince's imperial house under the pretext of apologizing to his brother. A butler named Coyle welcomed him and took him to Gilbert Ararat. Once in front of his older brother, Gilbert, calm as ever, acknowledged that aside from the death penalty, there was no other way to deal with a mere member of his house who had committed such a crime against an imperial prince. Noah argued that he should still have consulted him since it involved someone from his household. However, truth be told, Gilbert couldn't even remember who Dalem was. In that moment, Coyle reminded him that Dalem had been reassigned to the ministry of the imperial household a few years earlier. That not only helped Gilbert remember the man, but also reinforced that he wasn't worthy of any sympathy, since he had been expelled from the house precisely for bad behavior, and shouldn't even be considered part of Gilbert Ararat's household anymore. Being honest, the first prince praised his younger brother's actions and understood why the emperor had appointed the boy as the kingdom's representative of justice, since many wouldn't have the same level of understanding in such a delicate matter. Once outside the mansion, Noah is questioned by Shirley Grants about the reason for that apology, especially while handcuffed, since the first prince was clearly not giving a damn about that guy. However, Noah explains that, despite looking calm, Gilbert was furious, but he didn't want to start a quarrel with his brother at that moment, since he knows very well that Noah has been favored by the emperor. Besides, it's commonly understood that an older brother should at least go easy on the younger one if he apologizes humbly, not to mention that Gilbert easily cast Dalem and the slave traders aside. If Noah hadn't done anything, he believes he would have become a victim of persecution, because behind the curtains his brother sees him as an enemy, but now that he apologized and Gilbert accepted, it becomes harder for him to act hostile later. At least, that's the code of conduct among the nobility. The next day, the troublesome matter with Dalem seems to drag on until that moment, when, in the morning, Noah receives a visit from a member of the imperial household ministry. The man introduces himself as Don Orts and says he is impressed with the way the 13th prince handled yesterday's incident, and because of that he offers his services in the name of House Noah. Noah reminds him that the jurisdictions of the two places are quite different and that Orts might have trouble adapting to this house. But he simply doesn't care and insists that he can be used in whatever way his master deems necessary. Therefore, the young prince accepts the man, who breaks into a smile and leaves joyfully. Once Don Orts has left the mansion, Noah tells Dylan to keep an eye on him. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.